Sarah Chen adjusted her military surplus camouflage jacket as she walked through the crowded hallway of Riverside High School. The familiar whispers and snickers followed her like shadows. Her classmates had made it clear from day one that her choice of clothing marked her as different, weird, a misfit who didn't belong in their perfectly curated world of designer brands and social media popularity. "Look, it's Army Girl again," Madison Stevens called out, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Did you forget we're not at war, Sarah? This is high school, not a battlefield." Sarah kept walking, her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. The teasing had started 3 years ago when she first arrived at Riverside, the daughter of a single mother who worked double shifts at the local diner. The camouflage clothing wasn't a fashion statement or an attempt to be edgy. It was practical, durable, and most importantly, affordable at the military surplus store. What her classmates didn't know was that Sarah spent her afternoons and weekends at something far more important than shopping at the mall or posting selfies. While they were worried about their follower counts, she was learning skills that would have impressed even the most hardened military instructors. Her mother, Elena Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan 20 years ago with nothing but determination and a fierce protective instinct for her daughter. What Elena had never told Sarah was that before becoming a diner waitress in small-town America, she had been something else entirely. Something that would have shocked the quiet community of Riverside if they had known the truth. As Sarah entered her physics class, she noticed the usual arrangement. The popular kids clustered together in the back, the academic achievers claimed the front rows, and she took her customary seat in the middle left, where she could observe everyone while remaining relatively invisible. Mr. Henderson was explaining quantum mechanics, but Sarah's mind wandered to the encrypted messages she had been receiving on her modified radio equipment. For the past 6 months, strange signals had been appearing on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The transmissions were brief, seemingly random, but Sarah had noticed patterns that others might miss. Her hobby of amateur radio operation, combined with her natural aptitude for mathematics and pattern recognition, had led her to a disturbing conclusion. The signals weren't coming from Earth. During lunch, Sarah sat alone in the courtyard, picking at her homemade sandwich while the football team practiced on the adjacent field. She pulled out a small handheld device that looked like an ordinary calculator, but was actually a frequency scanner she had built from salvaged electronics. The device crackled softly as it swept through various bands, searching for anomalies. "Still playing with your toys, Chen?" Derek Morrison, the quarterback, had approached with his usual entourage. "When are you going to grow up and act like a normal person?" Sarah looked up at him with calm eyes. Derek was everything the town valued: athletic, handsome, from a wealthy family, and destined for a football scholarship. He was also completely unprepared for what was coming. "Normal is relative," Sarah replied quietly, her fingers still working the controls of her device. "What's normal for you might be catastrophic for others." Derek laughed, but there was an edge to it. Something about Sarah's unwavering confidence had always made him uncomfortable. She never cowered, never cried, never gave him the reaction he expected from his targets. "You're such a freak," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. As Derek and his friends walked away, Sarah's device suddenly erupted with activity. Multiple signals were appearing across the spectrum, all transmitting in perfect synchronization. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the pattern. It was a countdown sequence, and it was accelerating. That evening, Sarah sat in her bedroom, surrounded by electronics that would have impressed most college engineering students. Her mother had always encouraged her technical interests, providing whatever support she could afford. Sarah had assumed it was simply parental encouragement, but lately she had begun to notice things that didn't quite add up. The way her mother's eyes would sharpen when military aircraft flew overhead. The fact that their small apartment contained books on advanced physics and military strategy that seemed far beyond what a diner waitress would normally read. The midnight phone calls her mother received, speaking in languages Sarah couldn't identify. Sarah's radio crackled to life with an incoming transmission. This time the signal was stronger, clearer, and terrifyingly close. As she adjusted the frequency, a voice emerged from the static. It wasn't speaking English or any Earth language she recognized, but somehow she understood the meaning with crystal clarity. "Advanced scouts report successful infiltration. Human defenses appear minimal. Population shows no awareness of our presence. Recommend immediate commencement of harvesting protocol." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She needed to call someone, warn someone. But who would believe a teenage girl who claimed to be intercepting alien communications? Her finger hovered over her mother's number, but Elena was working the night shift and wouldn't be home until dawn. The radio crackled again. Confirmed. Begin Phase 1 deployment. Target selection. Population centers with minimal military presence.
Initial strike zone identified. Coordinates 39.2904, 76.6122. Sarah's geography knowledge kicked in immediately.
Those coordinates placed the target less than 50 miles from Riverside. Her quiet little town with its single police station and volunteer fire department was about to become ground zero for something unimaginable. She grabbed her jacket and ran outside, her mind racing through possibilities. The night sky looked peaceful, stars twinkling in their familiar patterns, but Sarah knew that appearance was deceiving. Somewhere up there, invisible to the naked eye, humanity's first contact with an alien species was about to begin, and it wasn't going to be the peaceful, diplomatic encounter that science fiction movies had imagined. As she stood in her backyard, staring up at the stars, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow at school, she would have to find a way to convince her classmates that the girl they mocked for wearing camouflage might be the only one prepared for the war that was coming. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Riverside High School buzzed with the usual teenage drama as students filed through the doors, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. Sarah had barely slept, spending the night monitoring radio frequencies and documenting the alien transmissions. Her notebook was filled with coordinates, timestamps, and increasingly urgent messages that painted a terrifying picture of what was coming. She had tried calling the FBI, the military, even NASA, but no one would take a teenage girl seriously. The responses ranged from polite dismissal to outright laughter. One particularly condescending agent had suggested she focus on her homework instead of watching too much science fiction. Sarah walked through the hallway in her usual camouflage gear, but today the familiar mockery felt different. Her classmates had no idea they were making fun of someone who might be their only hope for survival. She had spent the early morning hours researching the coordinates from the alien transmissions and discovered a pattern that made her stomach churn. The targets weren't random cities or military bases. They were small towns, rural communities, places with minimal defenses and maximum vulnerability. During first period chemistry, Sarah's modified phone vibrated with an encrypted alert she had programmed. New transmissions were coming in and they were close. She raised her hand and asked to use the restroom, leaving her confused teacher to wonder why the quiet girl who never caused trouble suddenly seemed so agitated. In the empty hallway, Sarah activated her handheld scanner. The signals were stronger now, coming from multiple directions. As she traced the approximate locations, her blood ran cold. The aliens weren't just planning to attack. They were already here, positioning themselves around the town like pieces on a chessboard. When she returned to class, Derek Morrison was holding court near the windows, regaling his friends with stories from the previous night's party. Sarah noticed he kept glancing outside with unusual frequency, as if something had caught his attention. She followed his gaze and saw what had captured his interest. Strange cloud formations were gathering on the horizon, moving against the wind in patterns that defied meteorology. "Mr. Henderson," Sarah said, interrupting the teacher's explanation of molecular bonding. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the weather patterns today?" The elderly teacher looked out the window and frowned. "Now that you mention it, those clouds do look rather odd, but I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation." Madison Stevens rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, great. Now Army Girl thinks she's a meteorologist too. What's next, predicting alien invasions?" Sarah's expression remained calm, but inside she was screaming. If only Madison knew how close to the truth she had stumbled. Sometimes the most obvious explanation is the most dangerous one to ignore, Sarah replied quietly. During lunch, Sarah positioned herself in the courtyard with a clear view of the sky. Her scanner was detecting so much activity that she had to adjust the sensitivity to prevent it from overloading. The football team was practicing on the field, their usual confident swagger on full display, but Sarah noticed that several players kept looking up nervously. Coach Williams blew his whistle and called for a water break. As the players clustered around the sidelines, Derek jogged over to where Sarah was sitting. "Hey, Chen," he said, his usual arrogance replaced by something that might have been concern. You always carry that weird gadget around. Does it pick up anything strange? Sarah looked up at him, studying his face. For once, Derek seemed genuinely worried rather than looking for an opportunity to mock her. Why do you ask? It's probably nothing, Derek said, but his voice suggested otherwise. It's just my dad works air traffic control at the regional airport, and he's been getting some weird readings on the radar. Things that shouldn't be there, moving in ways that don't make sense. Sarah's pulse quickened. This was the opening she needed. Derek, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to trust me. Before she could continue, her scanner erupted with the loudest signal yet. The sound was so intense that several students nearby turned to look. Sarah quickly adjusted the volume, but not before catching fragments of a transmission that made her heart race. Ground teams in position. Initiation sequence begins in 30 Earth minutes. All civilians within the designated zones are to be considered acceptable losses during the harvesting operation. Derek had gone pale. Sarah, what the hell was that? That, Sarah said, standing up and shouldering her backpack, was confirmation that we're about to become the first course in an alien buffet. The football players who had overheard the exchange began to gather around. Even Madison and her friends had stopped their usual gossiping to listen. Sarah realized that this might be her only chance to convince them before it was too late. I know you all think I'm weird, she began, her voice carrying across the courtyard. You've made it clear that my clothes, my interests, my whole existence is some kind of joke to you. But right now I'm the only one who knows what's coming, and we have less than 30 minutes to prepare. Prepare for what? Asked Jessica Walsh, one of Madison's followers. An invasion, Sarah said simply. They've been positioning themselves around the town for weeks. I've been monitoring their communications, tracking their movements. Riverside wasn't chosen randomly. We're isolated, we have minimal law enforcement, and most importantly, we have something they want. Which is what? Derek demanded. Sarah looked around at the gathering crowd of students, teachers, and staff who had been drawn by the commotion. Us, specifically young humans, we're not just being invaded, we're being harvested. The silence that followed was broken by nervous laughter from some of the students. But Sarah could see that doubt was beginning to creep in. The strange clouds, the weird radar readings, the growing sense of unease that had been building all morning. It was all starting to add up. Principal Harrison had emerged from the building, clearly intending to break up what he assumed was some kind of student gathering. But as he approached, Sarah's scanner crackled to life with a new transmission, this one clear enough for everyone to hear. Final phase initiation confirmed. Begin atmospheric disruption protocols. Ensure no human escapes the collection zone. Principal Harrison stopped mid-stride, his face draining of color. Above them, the strange clouds began to move faster, swirling into unnatural patterns that blocked out the sun. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a matter of seconds, and an eerie silence fell over the school grounds. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, the same classmates who had mocked her, the teachers who had dismissed her, the administrators who had never taken her seriously. Now they were all looking at her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. So, she said, adjusting the straps of her backpack and checking the tactical knife she kept clipped to her belt, who's ready to find out why I really wear camouflage to school? The sky above Riverside High School had transformed from blue to an ominous green-gray, and the temperature continued to plummet. Students who moments before had been lounging in the autumn sunshine were now huddling together, their breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. Sarah's scanner was going crazy, picking up transmissions from multiple sources that were definitely not human in origin. Everyone needs to get inside. Now, Sarah commanded, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. Away from windows, away from open spaces. They're going to start with aerial reconnaissance. Who put you in charge? Madison snapped, but her usual venom was undermined by the fear in her eyes. The girl who's been preparing for this while you were worried about your Instagram followers. Derek shot back, surprising everyone, including himself. Sarah, what do we need to do? Before Sarah could answer, a sound unlike anything they had ever heard filled the air. It was part electronic hum, part organic growl, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound made their teeth ache and their vision blur, as if their very molecules were being vibrated at frequencies human bodies weren't designed to handle. That's a scanning pulse, Sarah said. pulling out what looked like a small silver blanket from her backpack. "They're mapping every living thing in the area. Everyone get under this, quickly!" The students pressed close together as Sarah unfurled the material. It was larger than it appeared, stretching to cover nearly 20 people, and it seemed to shimmer with an almost liquid quality. "What is that thing?" whispered Jessica. "Emergency signal-blocking fabric," Sarah replied. "My mom brought it home from work." What Sarah didn't say was that she had been wondering for months where her mother could possibly work that would require such advanced technology. Diner waitresses didn't typically have access to materials that could block alien scanning technology, but Sarah had learned not to question the gifts that kept appearing in their apartment. The scanning pulse passed over them 3 times, each wave more intense than the last. When it finally faded, Sarah carefully folded the fabric and tucked it away. Above them, the unnatural clouds had begun to part, revealing shapes that made several students gasp in terror. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. The alien craft looked more like living things, organic, flowing with surfaces that shifted and pulsed like skin. There were dozens of them, ranging in size from objects the size of cars to massive constructs that dwarfed the school building. They moved with a grace that was both beautiful and terrifying, defying gravity as if it were merely a suggestion. "Oh my God," Principal Harrison whispered. "This is really happening." Sarah was already moving, leading the group toward the school building. "We need to get to the gymnasium," she said. "It's the most structurally sound building on campus, and it has multiple exit routes." "How do you know that?" asked Coach Williams. "Because I've been studying this place for 3 years waiting for something like this to happen," Sarah replied. She had spent countless hours mapping the school's layout, identifying defensive positions and planning escape routes. What she had originally conceived as preparation for a human threat had proven invaluable for an alien one. As they reached the main building, Sarah's scanner picked up a new type of transmission. This one was different, closer, more immediate, and definitely coming from ground level. "They're not just in the sky," she announced grimly. "They've got ground units moving in from all directions." Through the windows, they could see shapes moving through the parking lot. The aliens on the ground were bipedal but clearly not human. They moved with an insect-like quality, their bodies covered in what appeared to be natural armor. Each one carried devices that hummed with the same energy signature Sarah had been detecting on her scanner. "Sarah," Derek said, his voice tight with fear, "please tell me you have a plan." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, teachers and students who had never taken her seriously, who had dismissed her as a weird kid playing dress-up. Now their lives depended on the knowledge and skills she had been quietly developing while they lived in blissful ignorance. "The plan was always to survive long enough for help to arrive," she said, "but I'm starting to think help isn't coming from where we expected." As if summoned by her words, Sarah's scanner crackled with a new transmission. This one was different from the alien communications. The encryption was more sophisticated. The signal strength indicated it was coming from much farther away, and most importantly, it was in English. "All units, this is Guardian Control. We have confirmed alien contact at multiple locations. Priority objectives are civilian evacuation and asset protection. Response teams are en route to all affected areas." Sarah's blood ran cold. Guardian Control wasn't a military designation she recognized, but the professional tone and specific language suggested this wasn't the first time they had dealt with something like this. "Sarah," Madison said, her voice small and frightened, "who are these Guardian people? And what did they mean by asset protection?" Before Sarah could answer, the school's emergency intercom system crackled to life. But instead of Principal Harrison's voice or a recorded message, what came through the speakers was something that made everyone freeze in terror. "Human younglings," the voice said, each word carefully pronounced but clearly not coming from a human throat. "You have been selected for integration into our collective. Resistance will result in damage to your biological systems. Compliance will ensure your continued existence in service to the greater purpose." The message repeated in several languages, each repetition more chilling than the last. Sarah noticed that the aliens' version of human speech included languages that definitely weren't taught at Riverside High School. They had been studying humanity for a long time. "Integration?" Derek whispered. "What do they mean by integration?" Sarah checked her scanner again. The alien ground units were now surrounding the building, and more ships were descending from the sky. But there was something else. New signals appearing on frequencies she associated with human military communications. Whatever Guardian Control was, they were getting close. They mean they want to turn us into something like them, Sarah said grimly. But I don't think they counted on one thing. What's that? Asked Coach Williams. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, it was a smile filled with genuine confidence rather than just determination. They don't know about my mom. As if on cue, Sarah's personal radio, not the scanner, but a small device she had never seen her mother without, burst to life with a transmission that made her heart race with hope. Sarah Chen, this is Guardian Actual. Your mother sends her regards. Stay exactly where you are and keep your head down. The cavalry is about to arrive and it's going to be loud. Through the window, Sarah could see the alien ground units suddenly change their movement patterns. They were no longer advancing on the school. Instead, they were taking defensive positions, as if they had detected something that concerned them. In the distance, barely audible over the alien ship's humming, came a sound that made Sarah's smile grow wider. It was the distinctive rhythm of military helicopter rotors, but there was something different about this particular aircraft's approach. It was flying faster and lower than any helicopter she had ever heard, and it was coming straight for the school. The sound of approaching rotors grew louder, but Sarah could tell this wasn't an ordinary helicopter. The frequency of the blade beats was wrong, and there was an underlying harmonic that suggested technology far more advanced than anything in the public military arsenal. Through the classroom windows, she could see the alien ground units becoming increasingly agitated, their movement shifting from confident advance to defensive positioning. Sarah, Derek said, pressing close to the window despite her earlier warnings about staying away from glass. What kind of helicopter moves like that? Sarah was monitoring her scanner, watching as new signals flooded the spectrum. The aircraft approaching wasn't just a helicopter. It was broadcasting on frequencies that matched the alien communications while simultaneously transmitting human military codes. Whatever was coming, it was designed to fight this enemy. That's not just any helicopter, she said quietly. That's a Guardian Corps Black Hawk, and it's been specifically modified for extraterrestrial combat. The students and teachers around her stared in confusion, but Sarah was beginning to understand. Her mother's mysterious phone calls, the advanced equipment that kept appearing in their apartment, the way Elena Chen's eyes would sharpen whenever military aircraft passed overhead. It all made sense now. The aircraft finally came into view, and it was unlike anything they had ever seen. While it maintained the basic silhouette of a Black Hawk helicopter, every surface was covered in what appeared to be the same signal-blocking material Sarah had used to hide them from the alien scanners. Weapons pods mounted beneath the aircraft hummed with energy that matched the alien technology, and the entire craft seemed to shimmer slightly, as if it were somehow existing in two places at once. As the modified Black Hawk approached the school, the alien ships in the sky began to converge on its position. The ground units opened fire with weapons that discharged bolts of energy, rather than conventional ammunition. The air around the helicopter filled with crackling streams of alien fire, but none of it seemed to connect with the aircraft. It's like they can't see it properly, Madison whispered in amazement. They can see it, Sarah corrected, but their targeting systems can't lock onto it. The Guardian Corps has been reverse engineering alien technology for years. The Black Hawk touched down on the football field with impossible precision, its rotors still spinning. The cargo bay doors slid open and figures in combat gear began pouring out. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. Their equipment was clearly human in design, but incorporated technology that had definitely not originated on Earth. Leading the squad was a figure that made Sarah's heart leap with recognition and terror. Even at a distance, even wearing full combat gear, she knew that movement pattern, that confident stride. Her mother stepped out of the helicopter like she owned the battlefield, carrying a weapon that looked like it had been designed by aliens and built by humans. Guardian Actual to all units. Elena Chen's voice came through Sarah's radio. Primary objective located. Beginning civilian extraction. Secondary teams engage alien ground units. Remember, we want prisoners for intelligence gathering. Sarah watched in stunned amazement as her mother, the woman she had known as a diner waitress who struggled to pay rent, began coordinating a military operation with the precision of someone who had been doing this for decades. Elena's team spread out across the football field, their movements perfectly choreographed, their weapons firing beams of energy that actually seemed to affect the alien attackers. The alien ground units that had seemed so terrifying moments before were now retreating, their confidence shattered by an enemy that could match their technology. Several of the smaller alien aircraft began descending toward the football field, but Elena's team was ready for them. "Sarah Chen." Elena's voice came directly through Sarah's personal radio. "I need you to lead your classmates to the main entrance. We're going to extract you one group at a time." "Mom," Sarah replied, keying her radio with shaking hands. "What the hell is going on?" "Language, young lady?" Elena replied, and Sarah could hear the smile in her voice even over the sound of energy weapons fire. "We'll discuss my career choices when we get home. Right now, I need you to be the leader I trained you to be." Sarah looked around at her classmates, teachers, and school administrators who were all staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. These were the same people who had mocked her military surplus clothing, dismissed her technical interests, and treated her like a social outcast. Now they were looking at her like she might be their salvation. "All right, everyone," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority she had inherited from her mother. "We're going to move as a group to the main entrance. Stay low, stay together, and do exactly what I tell you." As they prepared to leave the classroom, Derek grabbed Sarah's arm. "Your mom is some kind of secret agent, isn't she?" "Apparently," Sarah replied. "And I'm starting to think my childhood wasn't as normal as I thought." They made their way through the hallways, Sarah leading with her scanner to detect any alien infiltrators who might have entered the building. The device was picking up traces of alien technology throughout the school, suggesting that the invasion had been planned much more carefully than anyone had realized. When they reached the main entrance, Sarah could see the full scope of the battle taking place on the football field. Elena's team had established a defensive perimeter around their helicopter, while additional Guardian Corps aircraft were arriving from multiple directions. The alien ships were retreating toward the horizon, but they were being pursued by human aircraft that clearly incorporated alien propulsion technology. "How long has this been going on?" Principal Harrison asked, his voice filled with shock. "Based on what I'm seeing," Sarah replied, "I'd guess the Guardian Corps has been preparing for this invasion for at least 20 years, maybe longer." Elena's voice crackled through the radio again. "Sarah, I need you to evacuate your group in teams of 5. Teachers first, then students by alphabetical order." "And Sarah?" "Yeah, Mom. I'm proud of you. You kept them alive long enough for us to get here." As the first group of teachers prepared to make the run across the open ground to the helicopter, Sarah realized that her life would never be the same. The girl who had been mocked for wearing camouflage to school had turned out to be the daughter of humanity's first line of defense against an alien invasion. More than that, she had been unknowingly trained for this moment her entire life. Madison Stevens was in the second group to be evacuated, and as she prepared to leave, she grabbed Sarah's hand. "I'm sorry," Madison said quietly, "for everything. For making fun of you, for not understanding what you were preparing for." Sarah squeezed her hand briefly. "You couldn't have known. None of us could have known how much the world was about to change." As Madison's group sprinted across the football field toward the helicopter, Sarah caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. Additional alien ships were approaching from the east, much larger than the ones they had seen before. These weren't scout vessels or ground support craft. These were invasion ships carrying enough aliens to overwhelm even the Guardian Corps forces. "Mom," Sarah called into her radio, "we've got bigger problems incoming from the east." Elena's response was immediate and calm, the voice of someone who had faced impossible odds before. "Copy that, Guardian Jr. Time to find out what you inherited besides my good looks." Sarah looked down at her scanner and noticed something she had missed before. Hidden among all the alien signals was a new frequency, one that her device was somehow able to access despite having never been programmed for it. As she tuned into the signal, she heard something that changed everything. It was a human voice, speaking in a language she had never learned but somehow understood perfectly. And it was coming from inside her own head. The voice in Sarah's head was speaking in what sounded like English, but the words carried meanings far deeper than their surface definitions. As she concentrated on the signal, she began to understand that she wasn't just receiving a transmission. She was accessing something that had been dormant inside her for her entire life. "Guardian genetic protocol activated," the voice said. "Subject Sarah Chen. Designation Guardian Junior 77 Alpha. Inheritance sequence initiated. Sarah staggered, her scanner falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. Around her, the remaining students and staff were preparing for their turn to evacuate. But all Sarah could focus on was the flood of information pouring into her consciousness. Tactical data, alien technology specifications, combat protocols, and most shocking of all, memories that weren't her own. She saw her mother as a young woman, not much older than Sarah was now, standing in a laboratory surrounded by technology that was clearly not of Earth origin. Elena was working alongside scientists and military personnel, studying captured alien equipment and developing countermeasures for an invasion that everyone hoped would never come. Sarah, Derek's voice seemed to come from very far away. Sarah, what's wrong? But Sarah was experiencing something far beyond what her classmates could understand. The genetic modifications that had been made to her mother's DNA before Sarah's birth were finally activating, triggered by proximity to alien technology and the stress of actual combat. She was becoming something more than human, something designed specifically to fight an enemy that conventional military forces couldn't touch. Her vision shifted, and suddenly she could see energy patterns that had been invisible before. The alien ships approaching from the east weren't just larger. They were carrying technology that would overwhelm the Guardian Corps forces. But she could also see their weaknesses, patterns in their energy fields that could be exploited if someone knew exactly where to strike. "Mom," Sarah said into her radio, her voice somehow calmer than it had any right to be. "The incoming ships have a vulnerability in their primary power coupling. It's located at the intersection of their lateral energy grids, approximately 30 meters aft of their forward sensor arrays." Elena's response came back immediately. "How the hell do you know that, Sarah?" "Because I can see it," Sarah replied, and she realized that she actually could. Her enhanced vision was showing her things that no human eye should be able to detect. "Mom, what did you do to me?"
What I had to do to give humanity a fighting chance, Elena replied.
"We'll discuss the ethics later. Right now I need you to guide our targeting systems." Sarah looked around at her remaining classmates. Derek, a few other students who were scheduled for the last evacuation group, and Coach Williams, who had insisted on staying behind to make sure everyone else got out safely. They were all staring at her with expressions of confusion and growing alarm. "I'm sorry you had to see this," Sarah said to them. "I'm about to become something that's going to be hard to explain." The transformation was subtle at first. Sarah's eyes began to emit a faint luminescence and her skin took on an almost metallic sheen. But the real change was in her awareness. She could suddenly perceive the entire battlefield as if she were viewing it from a dozen different angles simultaneously. Every alien ship, every Guardian Corps aircraft, every energy weapon discharge, it all existed in her consciousness as a complex three-dimensional map. "Guardian Junior 77 Alpha online," she heard herself saying, though she wasn't entirely sure she was the one speaking. "Tactical assessment complete. Recommend immediate implementation of Protocol Omega." Derek backed away from her, his face pale with shock. "Sarah, your eyes are glowing." "I know," Sarah replied, and her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there moments before. "Derek, I need you to listen carefully. Everything you thought you knew about me, about my family, about this town, none of it was real. We've been waiting for this invasion for 20 years, and I was created to be humanity's ultimate weapon against them." The large alien ships were now close enough that Sarah could analyze their individual crew complements and weapon systems. What she saw made her realize that the Guardian Corps was severely outgunned. The aliens had brought enough firepower to level several cities, and they clearly intended to make Riverside an example of what happened to human communities that resisted. "Mom," Sarah called through her radio, "you need to pull your people back. Those ships are carrying planet-killer weapons. They're not here to capture prisoners, they're here to send a message to the rest of humanity." Elena's response was grimly professional. "Understood, Guardian Junior. What do you recommend?" Sarah closed her enhanced eyes and accessed tactical databases that she hadn't known existed moments before. The information flowing through her consciousness included detailed specifications for alien technology, Guardian Corps equipment capabilities, and most importantly, strategic options that conventional military thinking couldn't conceive. "I can stop them," Sarah said quietly, "but I'll need to use abilities that will change me permanently. Once I do this, I won't be entirely human anymore." She opened her eyes and looked at Derek, who was still standing nearby despite his obvious fear. I'm sorry you had to be here for this. You're going to see things that will give you nightmares for the rest of your life. Sarah, Derek said, his voice shaking. What are you? I'm what happens when humans decide that survival is more important than remaining completely human, Sarah replied. I'm a guardian, and I was bred to be the thing that stands between Earth and extinction. The alien ships opened fire, sending streams of energy toward the Guardian Corps forces on the football field. Sarah watched the beams approach with enhanced perception that allowed her to track individual photons. Without conscious thought, she raised her hand and something impossible happened. The energy beams stopped in midair, frozen like amber insects caught in time. Sarah could feel the alien weapon's power flowing through her, being absorbed and redirected by systems in her body that she was only now discovering existed. The modifications her mother had made weren't just genetic, they were technological, incorporating alien hardware that had been seamlessly integrated into her cellular structure. Guardian Jr. engaging hostile forces, Sarah announced, her voice now carrying frequencies that made the windows around them vibrate. All friendly forces maintained current positions. She stepped out of the school building, walking calmly across the open ground while energy beams continued to freeze in the air around her. The alien ship's weapons were useless against her, their most devastating. Attacks being absorbed and converted into power for her own systems. Derek and the others watched from the doorway as Sarah approached the football field where her mother's team was taking cover. Elena looked up at her daughter and Sarah could see pride and sorrow warring in her expression. I'm sorry, baby, Elena called out. I wanted you to have a normal life for as long as possible. Normal was never an option, was it? Sarah replied, and now her voice carried across the battlefield without any need for radio transmission. Not when humanity was facing extinction. Sarah turned her attention to the alien ships and did something that would be talked about in Guardian Corps training facilities for generations to come. She reached out with senses that extended far beyond her physical body and began to systematically disable every hostile craft in the sky. The process was elegant and terrifying. Sarah didn't destroy the ships. Instead, she reached into their power systems and simply turned them off. One by one, the massive alien vessels began falling toward the ground, their crews experiencing the unprecedented sensation of having their technology fail completely. How is she doing that? Coach Williams whispered from the school entrance. Because she's not entirely human anymore, Derek replied, watching his classmate perform feats that redefined what was possible. She's something new, something designed to fight them on their own level. The largest alien ship, the one Sarah had identified as carrying planet-killer weapons, attempted to flee. But Sarah was faster than anything in the sky. She didn't run or fly, she simply moved, covering the distance between herself and the escaping ship in a way that seemed to bend space itself. The students and staff watching from the school saw Sarah appear next to the massive alien vessel, hovering in midair without any visible means of support. She placed her hands on the ship's hull, and everyone could see the alien craft begin to glow with the same luminescence that surrounded Sarah's enhanced form. Guardian Jr. to all units. Sarah's voice came through every radio on the battlefield. Primary threat neutralized. Beginning intelligence extraction from captured vessels. What happened next would reshape humanity's understanding of the universe. As Sarah interfaced directly with the alien ship's computer systems, she downloaded not just tactical information but the complete history of the alien species, their technology, and most importantly, their plans for Earth. The aliens called themselves the Harvesters, and they had been systematically conquering worlds for millennia, but they had never encountered a species that could adapt their own technology and turn it against them. Humanity wasn't just defending itself. It was evolving into something that could challenge the Harvesters' dominance across the galaxy. 3 weeks had passed since what the media was calling the Riverside incident, though Sarah knew that name barely captured the magnitude of what had really happened. The alien invasion had been successfully repelled, but the world had changed in ways that most people were still struggling to understand. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and more importantly, humanity was no longer defenseless. Sarah walked through the halls of Riverside High School, but everything was different now. The same students who had once mocked her camouflage clothing now watched her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Some approached her with questions about the Guardian Corps. Others simply stared from a distance, unsure how to interact with someone who had single-handedly stopped an alien invasion. The media attention had been overwhelming at first. Every news organization in the world wanted to interview the teenager who had revealed humanity's secret defense program and demonstrated abilities that seemed to belong in science fiction rather than reality. But the Guardian Corps had strict protocols for protecting their operatives, especially the Guardian Juniors, and Sarah's public appearances had been carefully managed. During lunch, Sarah sat in her usual spot in the courtyard, but now she wasn't alone. Derek had started joining her regularly, along with several other students who had witnessed the events firsthand. Madison Stevens, surprisingly, had become something of an ally, using her social influence to shut down anyone who tried to spread wild rumors about what had really happened. "So," Derek said, unwrapping his sandwich, "have you heard anything about the other Guardian Juniors? Are they all activating like you did?" Sarah checked her encrypted communication device, a much more sophisticated piece of equipment than the scanner she had used before her transformation. "About half of them have activated so far. The alien invasion triggered a worldwide response, so Guardian Juniors in Beijing, London, São Paulo, and about 20 other cities have all gone through their transformations." "What's it like?" asked Jessica Walsh, who had overcome her initial fear and become genuinely curious about Sarah's new abilities. "Being enhanced, I mean." Sarah considered the question carefully. The physical changes were the most obvious: enhanced strength, speed, and perception that made her capable of feats no normal human could perform. But the mental changes were more profound. She now carried the accumulated knowledge of alien civilizations, understood technologies that had taken other species millennia to develop, and could interface directly with computer systems through methods that seemed like magic. "It's like having access to a library that contains the knowledge of entire civilizations," Sarah said finally, "but it's also lonely. There are concepts in my head that no normal human can understand. Experiences that I can't share with anyone except other Guardian Juniors." Principal Harrison approached their group, still looking somewhat shell-shocked from the events 3 weeks earlier. The revelation that one of his students was humanity's secret weapon against alien invasion had required some significant adjustments to his worldview. "Sarah," he said, "I just wanted you to know that the school board has approved the new curriculum additions you requested. Starting next semester, we'll be offering courses in xenobiology, advanced electronics, and tactical analysis." Sarah smiled. "Thank you, Principal Harrison. I think it's important that students start learning about the larger universe we're now part of." After the principal left, Derek shook his head in amazement. 3 weeks ago, you were just the weird girl who wore army surplus to school. Now you're redesigning the education system. The weird girl who wore army surplus was preparing for exactly this, Sarah pointed out. "I just didn't know it at the time." Her communication device chimed with an incoming message from Guardian Control. Sarah read the encrypted text and her expression grew serious. "What is it?" Madison asked, noticing the change in Sarah's demeanor. "Long-range sensors have detected another alien fleet approaching Earth," Sarah said quietly, "much larger than the Harvester Scout Force that attacked us. The Guardian Corps is activating all available assets." Derek's face went pale. "Does that mean you have to leave school? Go fight aliens full-time?" Sarah looked around at her classmates, the same people who had once treated her as an outcast but who now depended on her for protection. The Guardian Corps made a promise when they created the Guardian Junior program. We would be allowed to live as normal lives as possible, attending school and maintaining human connections, except when the survival of the species was at stake. "And this new alien fleet?" Jessica asked. "Definitely qualifies as a species survival situation," Sarah replied. She stood up, shouldering her backpack, which now contained equipment that could interface with Guardian Corps command systems anywhere on Earth. "I need to report to the local Guardian facility for briefing and deployment." As Sarah prepared to leave, she realized that this moment represented everything the Guardian Corps had tried to achieve. She wasn't just a weapon designed to fight aliens. She was a bridge between humanity's present and its future. The scared, lonely girl who had worn camouflage to feel protected had become the protector of everyone she cared about. "Will you be back?" Derek asked, and Sarah could hear the concern in his voice. "I'll be back," Sarah promised. The Guardian Corps learned from the Harvester invasion that Earth needs permanent defenders, not just crisis responders. "Riverside is my home, and I'm not letting anyone take it away from us." As Sarah walked toward the parking lot where a Guardian Corps transport was waiting, she reflected on how much her life had changed. 3 weeks ago, she had been an outcast, mocked for interests and clothing choices that seemed strange to her classmates. Now she was leaving school to help coordinate humanity's defense against an alien armada that could threaten the entire planet. But in many ways, she was still the same person. She still believed in preparation, in understanding potential threats, and in being ready for anything. The difference was that now everyone else understood why those beliefs were important. Her mother was waiting beside the transport vehicle, dressed in full Guardian Corps tactical gear. Elena smiled as Sarah approached, pride evident in her expression. "Ready to save the world again, Guardian Junior 77 Alpha?" Elena asked. Sarah looked back at the school where her classmates were watching from the windows, then up at the sky where humanity's newest challenge was approaching from the darkness between stars. "Ready as I'll ever be, Guardian Actual," Sarah replied. "Besides, someone has to make sure Derek passes his physics exam next week." As the Guardian Corps transport lifted off from the school parking lot, carrying Sarah toward whatever new threats awaited humanity among the stars, she knew that she would always be the girl who wore camouflage to school. The difference was that now everyone understood it wasn't about fitting in. It was about being prepared for the day when humanity would need heroes. And that day, it turned out, was every day from now on. The transport climbed toward the sky, where other Guardian Corps aircraft were already assembling into formation. Earth's defenders were mobilizing once again, led by teenagers who had been trained from birth for this moment. The alien invasion of Riverside had been just the beginning of humanity's introduction to a larger, more dangerous universe. But Sarah Chen, the girl who had once been mocked for wearing military surplus to high school, was ready for whatever came next. After all, she had been preparing for this her entire life.